How's it going, guys? Welcome back to the channel and welcome to another YouTube video. This is not going to be a DIY video. We're actually going to change it up a bit because I want to address a question that I've gotten repetitively over the last four and a half months now. So if you guys have been following the channel for a while or following me on Instagram, you'll know that I've been a big BMW guy for at least the last 15 plus years or so. And I recently took the jump into the Porsche life. So, I've had multiple M3s, most notably my most recent 2023 British Racing Green G80 M3 X-Drive Comp. And then I went over to the 992 Carrera S. So the major question that I keep getting asked over forums and things like that, Instagram, things like that, how do I feel about moving to Porsche in general, as well as the 992? How does it compare to the G80 M3? So the reason why I went with the 992 Carrera S is because I felt that it was going to be most comparable to a G80 M3. So I actually had two G80s. One was a 2022 manual Portimao blue, did a bunch of modifications to it, including femto, tuned the car, exhaust, intake, all kinds of stuff, suspension, everything. Ended up selling the car, wanted to try out the X-Drive. My plan was to make that car run 9s. I actually owned my British Racing Green 2023 G80 X-Drive Comp for 7.5, maybe 8 months total, which was not a long time. Spiraled out of control with the number of cars I had, and told myself that if certain things sold, that I would sell that and hunt for a Porsche. That's how we landed here on the 992 Carrera S. And again, I went with the 992 Carrera S because I thought it was going to be the most comparable to the G80 in terms of power, in terms of infotainment, things like that. And plus, what's not to like about the 992? It's such a beautiful body style. I do like the 991s as well. So I'll, consider different options, but I thought that this would be the most daily drivable option, as well as, like I said, the most comparable to a G80 in terms of power and things that I was looking for in a car. So fast forward here, I bought this car early January 2025. Fast forward, we're here towards the end of May 2025. So it's been about 4.5 months or so of ownership, and I've only put 700 miles on the car, which I know doesn't sound like a lot. With that being said, only 700 miles behind the wheel, I can kind of give you an idea of what it's been like owning this car for such a short amount of time and how it kind of stacks up against the G80. So I kind of took some notes here on my phone, which I'm going to kind of discuss several different topics. I'm going to discuss practicality, power, handling, creature comforts / infotainment, and finally, is it worth the money? So I'm going to kind of break this video out into those kind of sections and talk about each one. All right, first off, practicality. Obviously, this is a two-door coupe. Yes, it's got 4 seats, but the back seats are virtually unusable, I would say. Just to show you here what the inside of the cockpit looks like. So if we're doing a comparison here against the G80 M3, this is obviously going to lose in terms of practicality. So I'm going to have a couple boxes up here on win and loss column kind of thing on which car is the better of the category. So practicality, this obviously is going to lose. It's a lot smaller on the inside. The seats are pretty comfortable, actually. They are 14-way seats. Non-buckets, obviously. I had buckets in my first G80, but went with the comfort seats in my second G80, and I prefer the comforts in the G80 just for practicality purposes. But obviously, with this being a two-door, you have very little back seat room at all. I've never even sat back here. No one has in my ownership. I don't know if I can even fit, a baby seat back here. I probably could if I really wanted to. But there is virtually no foot room. There's no headroom. The seats are more, straight up and down vertical. You can't really recline it any further. So this is going to be not the most practical thing if you've got a family or, need to travel with multiple people, that sort of thing. But this is a completely different purpose-built car. So again, I bought this as a secondary car. I have my F30 340 that I daily drive, which takes daily duty, and I, has 4 doors, things like that. This is going to be more so my weekend car, hence the lower miles. But yeah, practicality, I'm going to give this basically, a loss compared to the two. Obviously, there is no rear trunk. It's rear engine. The front trunk, the frunk is actually a decent size for how small this car is. But obviously, how much can you fit inside of this thing? If you're going to the grocery store, you could probably fit a couple groceries in. Can you go to Costco and put a bunch of stuff in it? No, I would say definitely not. So it is nice and deep, which is kind of nice. I mean, you could put a small child in here, or a small human being and crouch down, but you're definitely not fitting full bodies in here. So definitely not a practical car. The G80 is going to take the cake in terms of practicality. So while we're talking about the size of the vehicle, let me just talk about the outside. It is practical from, a parking standpoint. Fitting it in parking spots, super easy. Getting it on my lift, super easy. It's, a lot smaller of a car than the G80, so I have limited space here in between the posts, and that was something that always concerned me, was pulling my G80 back into the garage here and getting it through the post without hitting my mirrors. The Porsche has no problem with that. So Porsche fits on the lift super easily. I don't have to care too much about being completely centered. Whereas the G80, I had to be perfectly centered. Otherwise I had a wheel hanging over the edge, that sort of thing. Parking spot, obviously this thing is a lot smaller, so it fits into a lot smaller, tighter spaces. And yeah, so nice size vehicle for what it is. It's actually pretty large for how small the inside is, but overall, again, sports car, and compared to some other sports cars on the market, I actually think it's okay. So it can be used as a daily if you wanted to. That was kind of my plan. With the summer months coming, I was going to try to daily this as much as I could. I've, driven the car to work several times. If I'm not carrying passengers or anything like that, then it's not a problem. But, if I need to go to Costco, I can't really exactly do that sort of thing. But again, purposely, bought this car as a weekend, enjoyable car, not something to daily drive. Next on the docket, let's talk power. So this thing makes 443 horsepower. The G80 xDrive Comp made 505. This has way less torque. It's 350 or something of that realm, whereas the G80 has a lot more. So in terms of power though, because of power to weight ratio, this is a much smaller, lighter car. Power to weight ratio, I actually think that it would be a really, really good race for both of those cars on the highway. And I haven't been able to test that theory, unfortunately, but just basically, doing butt dyno type situation where I'm driving the car, I can kind of feel how it is. This car actually keeps up really, really well with, some fast cars, and, this thing with a tune, try to make 600 horsepower, 650 wheel. I think this thing would be an absolute beast. Mine is the Carrera S, so it is rear-wheel drive, so it loses in that category in terms of, having traction compared to the G80 xDrive Comp, but it will definitely hold its own. From a dead stop, I would say that the G80 is definitely going to win, having that all-wheel drive versus a rear-wheel drive G80. I think it would be also kind of interesting to do. I think this one might get off the line a little bit better than a rear-wheel drive G80, but xDrive, you can't really beat that. But I would say, again, very, very comparable in terms of horsepower. In terms of modifications, though, not a ton on the market that you can do to these without changing the turbos and adding a lot more expensive things in order to get proper power out of it. So I would say that the G80 is going to be more tunable aftermarket wise. And obviously, guys are running 9s with just a couple bolt-ons versus this, which you're going to have to do quite a bit to make it run 9s. You'll have to do, pure 800 turbos, exhaust, try to run some ethanol in there and try to make, high horsepower in order to hit 9s in this car. It just doesn't hook the same way as the G80. So it kind of just depends. If you're looking for, a raw horsepower car, something that runs 9s in a quarter very, very easily with some mods, then by all means get the G80. But if you're looking for more of a canyon carver, something to enjoy on the weekends, you're not super concerned with horsepower and making crazy numbers and running, at the track, then this is more than suitable. So it's hard to say horsepower wise, who wins between this and the G80. I think it might be a toss up, just kind of depends on the scenario. All right, in terms of handling, which is the next category I want to discuss, this obviously takes the cake. This being a rear-wheel drive car though, it actually handles like an all-wheel drive car. Driving this thing fast on the highway, going in and out of some traffic, that sort of thing, going around corners, this thing enters a corner and exits way faster than a G80. I think this thing runs circles around a G80 in terms of handling. But again, much smaller, lighter weight car. It is lowered on H&R Sport Springs, but even in stock form, this thing will run circles around a G80 in the corners. All right, next up, creature comforts / infotainment. So it also kind of depends on between, the Porsche and the G80. It kind of depends on what kind of packages you add onto the car. Mine isn't fully loaded, but it's got all the necessary things, I would say. It does. My particular model does not have 360 cameras. It does have a rear camera, but there are no 360 cameras. It does have the parking sensors, which is helpful. Down here, you'll see the little dots. That's one thing I wish that my particular car had was 360 cameras, because it would give a camera in the front, would give a 360 view top down of what the vehicle looks like around the perimeter, things like that. So my G80 had all that, and it was nice to have that, especially when pulling into the garage with the lift and everything. So that's one thing I wish this thing had. But in terms of, other creature comforts, it's kind of weird the way these door handles work on the Porsche. We've got comfort access here, or arrive and drive is what Porsche calls it. But the door handles alone are just kind of really annoying to get to. Like, the G80 has a better door handle. This, you kind of really have to get underneath it and pull up. It's a little bit more cumbersome. Obviously, if you hit the unlock button on the car, then they open up like this automatically for you. Or, if you approach the car with your keys in the pocket, if you've got it set up that way, it'll open like this for you. But, if the car is just, idle, stagnant, sitting here, I have to really stick my hands underneath the door handle in order to open it. So that's kind of an annoying thing, whereas the G80, you could go down from the top, open it, go from the bottom and open it, no issues whatsoever. But it does have the arrive and drive, which is nice. I think the G80 has more tech. Again, this car is a 2020, but I do have a friend that's got a 2025 Turbo S, and he also has a 2023 F90 M5, and even he will tell you that the F90 has more creature comforts. And so one of the big complaints that I have, as does he, is the lack of a heads-up display. So yeah, we've got this really nice interior inside of here. Everything looks super nice and clean. We've got heated steering wheel, we've got heated seats in here. I've got ventilated seats in mine, which is an option. But simple things like it doesn't have heads-up display. And, for being 2025, I feel like that's something that Porsche could add easily without, it taking away from, the more analog driving experience. I think it's just a nice creature comfort, at least to offer. I understand a lot of Porsche guys are purists and they like to have the analog tach, and, at least with the .2, 992.2, they got rid of the actual switch here and they made it a push button. So I understand some of that stuff, but at least give people the option to have heads-up display and certain things in here that kind of make the experience a little bit better. Because especially if you're like my buddy who's spent $300,000 on a Turbo S and you don't have some of those same creature comforts that your $150,000 F90 M5 has, that's one thing that is kind of weird to me. Additionally, the nav screen here is very, very small. Mine is, again, a 2020. The infotainment system here is a little bit slow. I have to purposely unlock the car, 20, 30 seconds ahead of time. That way, when I get in the car, the infotainment is already kind of warmed up. If I don't do that and I just get in it and turn it on, I've got little spinning wheels here, which I'll show you. All right, so turning it on here, obviously it pops right up because I have already unlocked the car long beforehand. If I didn't do that and the car was completely locked and completely off, and I came in here, all of these little panels here would be spinning like it was thinking. And so I think that's just, kind of just a dated experience here in terms of the iDrive or the infotainment system here in the Porsche. BMW's iDrive system is a lot more advanced. There's a lot more things you can do in terms of customization and things like that. I will say, it scrolls pretty easily. If I wanted to click around, it's decently fast, jumping from page to page. So just to show you there, I can jump pretty quickly. It's just the initial startup sequence is very, very slow in this particular model. compared to some of the newer models. So my buddy's Dot 2 doesn't have this kind of issue. It starts right up just like that. Unfortunately, you know, even with updates and things on this particular PCM, I can't really do anything else. It's already at the most updated version, but that's just, you know, how it is. But as you guys can see, it scrolls around pretty easily, but there's just not a lot of customization. Whereas the G80 has a much bigger screen, especially if you've got, you know, an LCI model or a 2023 Plus where it's got, you know, the two screens basically that go all the way across here. It's much bigger, a lot easier to read. A lot more intuitive, a lot more, you know, customization. Like I mentioned, it's got ambient lighting. This one does not. So this car serves a very, very different purpose. It's a lot more analog feeling in terms of drivability and, you know, driving around town and things like that. Like, it's got very linear power, whereas the G80 is like very on, very off. You know, it's a complete monster. This kind of gives more of an analog feel. It almost feels kind of like a DCT from the, you know, E9X days of the BMW chassis, where, you know, it kind of acts like it's got, you know, clutches. You can kind of feel it engaging. This is a PDK S, so it does have the clutches, but you kind of have that same kind of lurching feeling that you get from the DCT, which is kind of cool. So a much more analog driving experience. You're more focused on, you know, looking at the tack and looking at the road and following the curves ahead of you versus playing around with the infotainment and playing around with, you know, CarPlay and things like that. This does have CarPlay, which I really appreciate, and I prefer to have CarPlay in all my cars now. So I just noticed that I don't use any of the apps here. Obviously, like, I'm not searching for hotels or parking or restaurants through here. I'm using my phone. You know, there is no ambient lighting, like I mentioned. Mine does have Porsche Sport exhaust, so I've got the button here. I can turn the spoiler up if I wanted to. So it's got some levels of customization here that I can program and stuff like that. But overall, you know, I would say the infotainment is much worse in here than the G80, but, you know, and the creature comforts are obviously, you know, not quite the same, but overall different experience. So I'm going to give this win to the G80 in terms of, you know, infotainment and creature comforts. All right, and my final category is it worth it? So I did pick this up on the used car market, so for me it was a lot more affordable than buying and speccing a brand new one. With the rising prices of the Porsches, you know, a Dot 2 base Carrera is 150K or something at this point. If you wanted an S, it's going to be like 175, 180 or something in that range, I think. And if you wanted a higher trim model, a GTS or obviously a GT3, you're going to be 200 plus. So from a purchasing standpoint that I had, you know, where I bought a 4-year-old car, it was still very expensive for what it is. Initially, I rented, or my friend Brad rented a Turo, a Carrera S, same year, 2020 Carrera S on Turo for his birthday. And so we were able to drive around. I drove around for a few days. After that initial drive, I was kind of like, is this worth, you know, $50,000 more than my BRG G80 at the time? At the time, after I drove it, I was like, I don't think that it is. I think the G80 is such a capable car. It's by far the best bang for the buck in that price range. And so I feel like you get a ton of car for the money, especially if you're into modifying and tuning and things like that, like I am. The G80 is going to be a much better option for you. If you want 4 doors and you need the practicality, that's where the G80 also wins. So is this car worth $40,000, $50,000 more than my G80 was? I don't know. I don't know how to answer that. I did obviously buy the car, so I thought it was worth doing, and it's been a phenomenal car. Don't get me wrong. I absolutely love this thing in my short amount of time that I've owned the car. But from a more practical standpoint, which takes over my brain most of the time, because I'm daily driving the car, because I want to enjoy it while I'm daily driving, and I need the practicality of having 4 doors, I think the G80 is the better bang for the buck. But that doesn't mean that I don't want this thing still, and it doesn't mean that I don't want both. So for me, my Realistic dream would be to daily drive a G80 M3 or an F90 M5 or a G90 M5. That would be my daily driver car. And then on top of the lift would be some sort of 911. It would either be another Carrera S, but in a manual, because I've got my daily to drive an automatic, and I want something for the weekend that's a manual that I can row gears in and enjoy my time and not worry about being super fast, but more so having a better driving experience. So again, the top of the lift would be, maybe I would do another 992 Carrera S in a manual. I would also love to do a GT car, GT3. I would love to try a GT4 at some point as well, but that would be my combination. BMW on the bottom for daily, and then a Porsche 911 on the top for the weekend. And so, is it worth it? I will say the G80 takes the category on this one, takes the win on that category because it's just the all-around better car. Is this worth buying still? Yes, it is. So I think both of them can technically get a win, but from a practicality standpoint, like I mentioned before, the G80 is going to take the cake. All right, so with all this being said, which keys would I take if I had the option to on a weekend? I'm taking the Porsche. Which keys am I gonna take if I've gotta go to work? I'm taking the G80. That's kind of my answer for you guys. This car is an absolute scalpel in comparison to the G80. The G80 is a lot more sloppy, it's more numb, it doesn't have quite that analog driving experience, but it does everything really, really, really well. This does things not so well, but the things that it does well, it does it really, really well. I mean, shifts on this thing are absolutely insane. I'll be cruising in 7th, 8th gear on the highway, and if I hammer it to pass a car, it'll drop down to 3rd in a millisecond. I mean, it takes literally no time at all to drop those gears and you're gone. So it does that very, very well. It handles very, very well. It's got very, very good power level. But again, practicality is a big thing for me, obviously. I've mentioned it so many times in this video, but yeah, so I think, the dream garage here is a G80 M3 or an M5 and then a 911 on the top. So that's kind of my answer for you guys. Scalpel versus something that's not quite as good, but all around a better car. That's kind of my take on it. Hopefully that kind of answers some of the questions I've gotten over DMs and things like that. I know a lot of people are curious about my thoughts on both of the cars. My answer is make enough money to own both. Hopefully that was a helpful video for you guys. If you guys have any comments, questions, or concerns, please let me know in the comments below. Stay tuned. I've got some details on things coming soon in another video to kind of explain where my head's at and what's happening in life, things like that. So stay tuned for that. Otherwise, we'll see you guys on the next video. Take care. Thanks for watching. See you on the next one.